Hi there, I'm Keenan Fry, and you're watching the Acid Drip. So, as you've probably already seen, there was an introductory video kind of introducing all the topics that I'm going to address in this video series. This is the actual first sort of tutorial video in the series. Again, none of this constitutes actual advice. I can't be held accountable for anything that you do or whatever, because this is me talking about myself. If you do anything related to this electrical equipment, that's your own responsibility. I do not take any accountability or responsibility for your actions. Got to say that in every single one of these videos because we are working with electronics. That's not a joke. Okay, now that that's out of the way, let's talk shop here. I have in my hands what's called an occluder. This is the sleep shade. Basically, the way this thing works is it's not going to simulate blindness. That's something that I can't really emphasize enough. So one of the things that we talk about in O&M is doing training shade work. And training shade work, it's not intended to simulate blindness. What it's supposed to do is stimulate your other senses by forcing you to rely on those senses in a manner that you normally wouldn't. So like on average, 90% of the information that a person processes is visual stimuli. So if you're, for a temporary period of time, depriving yourself of visual stimuli using the occluder, you're going to have to use that 10% that is non-visual information, auditory, tactile, olfactory, which is your smell, if appropriate, your gustatory or gustari, I don't even know how to pronounce it, that's your taste, your sense of taste. And then there's a few other systems like your vestibular and proprioceptive systems as well. These are all additional senses. You actually technically have 7 or 8 senses, give or take, not the normal 5. So with that kind of laid out, what's going to happen is I'm going to put on this occluder, training shade, whatever you want to call it, and I'm going to do a rundown on this Hoover vacuum cleaner. Now the vacuum cleaner has a figure 8 pattern on the cable, and I am going to unwind that cable successfully, plug it into the wall, unplug it from the wall, wind the cable back using the figure 8 pattern. And then in a separate video after this one, I'm going to very clearly demonstrate how that figure 8 pattern works, because what I'm going to do is go over it with just a regular old extension cord. One of the other things I'd like to say is that because I'm a one-man band and I'm doing all of this DIY, there might be some jump cuts because I'm going to be putting on the occluder and I'm going to have to stay in frame while going through the process of the vacuum cleaner. So like I said, if there's some jump cuts, I apologize, but I'm going to try and keep this as smooth as possible. So with that, let's get started. All right, guys, we're back, and I'm now wearing the occluder. Can't see anything. So anyway, I've got everything set up as best as I can. I'm positioned as best as I can for the camera, and what I have right here is my vacuum cleaner. So for starters, I am going to position myself so that my back is facing the wall. Now we're going to talk about clock face for a second. In front of me is 12 o'clock, behind is 6 o'clock. So right now, 12 o'clock is facing down my hallway, 6 o'clock, my back is facing the wall, and to 9 o'clock over here is my vacuum cleaner. Now on the far side of the vacuum cleaner, and I'm going to bring the vacuum cleaner in front of me. So now the vacuum cleaner should be directly in front of me. On the left side, you should be able to find your cable series. Now, not all vacuum cleaners are the same. This is my Hoover, okay? So bear with me. You're going to have to figure it out for your own vacuum cleaner. But what I'm going to identify is the way the cable is wrapped, because I'm going to talk to you a little bit about winding cables later on. Right here, I've got this little tab, and I can rotate it downwards. And what I'm doing is this green tab is sort of like one of the armatures that holds the cable in place. So I rotate it downwards, and I grab the cable, and it drops off. And I've got this giant bundled cable. It's a nice, neat bundle, and I'm keeping it neatly bundled, which means that my right hand is grasping the top of it, and I'm holding the bundle loop and I'm keeping it looped. I do not want to unravel the loop. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to reach out with my my left hand, excuse me. I got my left hand, I got the plug in my left hand. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to unwind the whole thing. So I'm going to just kind of feed it out, feed it out, feed it out. And now I've got it loosely fed out and the entire cable is unwound in front of me. Now it's important to recognize that because the vacuum cleaner was wound in a figure-8 pattern, the cable is unwound without any knots. So what I'm going to do in the next series is teach you how to wind a cable in a figure-8 pattern, because it's a very simple sort of tactile, very motor skill based skill. And what's going to happen is if you're able to wind a cable in a figure-8 pattern, it's always going to unravel without any knots. So we're going to talk about that in a second. So now I've got my prong. Now my prong is interesting because there's two kind of ends. There's the big end and then the smaller end. So the way the prong works is it's going to go facing into the wall. So I'm going to locate the wall. I got my hand on the wall and I'm going to do a tactile search pattern. And I'm searching and I've found my outlet. Now in the next video, I'm going to show you some, at the end of the video, not the next video, at the end of this video, I'm going to show you some helpful tips and tricks. One of those is the hammer trick, and the hammer trick will help you locate outlets, believe it or not. So we've got our outlet right here. Okay, so what's happened is I now have the plug in my left hand, and my left hand is my recessive hand. My dominant hand is going to be my right hand. So I'm going to follow the plug up to the vacuum cleaner. Oh, I just knocked something over. Gotta go find it. Okay. This is the hose attachment. I know that that goes right here. So I'm going to perform a tactile search, find where the hose attachment goes on, and reconnect it. And yeah, it's in the right place. Okay, so what I'm doing is I'm pinching where the cable inserts into the body of the vacuum cleaner. I know that that's where that's at. I'm going to grab some of that slack in my right hand, my dominant hand. And what I'm going to do is later on I'm going to climb up the neck of the vacuum cleaner and kind of grab onto the vacuum cleaner with some of that slack in my hand. And then what I'm going to have is I'm going to keep the plug in my left hand. Now here's the thing about American plugs and outlets, okay? So when you look at a 3-prong outlet, there are obviously 3 holes, but this is a 2-prong vacuum cleaner. Now let's talk about that for some safety reasons. Okay, so I'm holding the plug in my hand, and the way I'm holding it is the way it's going to insert in the wall. So I've got pinched between my 2 fingers the clip that's molded onto the plug head that clips the plug to the cable wind. What's going to happen is that's going to go facing downwards, and the plug is going to insert like this into the wall. And what's going to happen is there's 2 tangs or tabs, however you want to call it, that are going to plug in. One's larger than the other, and what's going to happen is the larger one is going to go on the left side, and that's neutral, and the smaller one is going to go on the right side, if I remember correctly. Yes. So let's talk about that for a second, okay? Live is always the left side of the outlet. The right side of the outlet is always neutral, and the bottom prong is ground. Now, common misconception. Obviously, live can shock you if you're not safe, but another common misconception is that the neutral receptacle can, in fact, shock you. I mentioned earlier this thing called bootlegging, which is a way to cheat. Common thing to happen, house is being renovated. They want to flip it real quick on the market. They got to rip out some electrical, put in some new electrical, and the guy who's doing it just, slap chops it. And what that means is they might link together multiple neutrals and backfeed 2 neutrals through one line to the main panel. Neutrals should be isolated. They should not share a channel. Sometimes they will poorly ground something. There's a number of ways where you can bootstrap something. whenever an outlet is bootstrapped, that basically means there's a potential for the outlet to become live. Not just the outlet itself, but maybe the top plate. There's any number of things that could possibly go wrong with poor electrical. But I want to put out there right now that the neutral can in fact shock you. So contrary to popular belief, it can. That's something to remember. And if you speak to an electrician, they say, oh, neutral can't shock you, find a different electrician. That's just a safety thing. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to locate the outer plate of the receptacle. I'm going to make sure my knee's not in the way of the camera. I still can't see anything. And what's happening is I'm feeling the receptacle between my thumb and middle finger. My hand's big enough to do that. Your hand may not, but it depends. Now I'm going to kind of feel for the middle of the plate, and I can feel the smooth area of the middle of the plate. This is in between the two plugs, so I've got a receptacle below me and a receptacle above me. Now from the middle of the plate, if I go upwards, I'm going to find the ground. Now the ground technically can't hurt you, but it can in some instances, again, if there's faulty wiring. It's one of those things where you should just always assume you can get shocked. Never assume that a receptacle is safe until you've tested it. And later on, I'll give you a sort of basic means of testing it. Now, I've got the plug in my hand. I've got my hand framing the outlet. There's an intersection to this particular outlet, and I can feel the outer edge of it. And I'm going to feel my plug head. So my thumb is on top of the plug head. My forefinger is underneath it. Okay, so that's catching. There it is, and there it is. Okay, so the way I did that, I'm going to reiterate it. I had my thumb on the top of the plug head. I had my index finger underneath it. I had my hand grappling it. I transferred it to my right hand because my right hand's my dominant hand. It's going to be easier for me to get it into the wall. What I did was I used my fingers to make a frame around my plate. Now I know that my plates have a top plate, and then there's a small change in the texture of the plate because right here in this area in the middle is where the actual receptacle is, and this is its own piece of electrical equipment. And so I can use a tactile search to find it. I'm kind of pinching it with the edge of my fingers using just the slightest pinch. I'm really not trying to cover too much surface area. I don't want to come too close to the receptacle, and I've got it on here. So my vacuum cleaner, even though it doesn't have a ground, is safe because what's happening is the channel is feeding from the live, which is on the right side of the outlet, into the neutral on the left side. So there is a charge passing through the neutral. Again, the neutral is not always safe. You can't just assume that the neutral is safe. It's not. Very dangerous misconception. So now I've got it plugged in. I'm going to follow it up, and I find my big old pile of cable, and I'm going to kind of follow that. And I've found the main insert line going into the body of the vacuum cleaner. And I've got my right hand on that part, got my left hand on the cable, and I'm basically feeding out some of the line into my left hand. I'm taking my right hand, I'm going to climb it up the side of the vacuum. I'm going to go to the top. I'm going to bring my left hand to the top, and now I have a little bit of lead going to the handle, and then I'm going to feed some slack between my left and right hand. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to drape the cable over my left shoulder and bring it down. And I'm bringing it down in front of my arm, and then I'm reaching behind me and I'm grabbing it. So it's forming kind of like a figure eight over my shoulder. I can even put this, if I want to, over the right side of my neck and have it loop under my left armpit, kind of like creating a diagonal loop. And what this is going to do is it's going to force the cable to stay behind me. And the cable is going to stay behind me, and I'm going to have the lead in front of me, and I'm going to be able to hold the lead in front. I'm going to tighten up this lead a little bit between my two hands. It's a little bit too loose. And I'm going to feed what's looped around my shoulder a little bit back down. And now I can feel, there we go, it's nice and taut. I can feel it. Listen to that. I'm going to pull on it. When I pull on it, it moves the vacuum cleaner. You can hear that rattling sound. Let me see if I can do that again for you. So when I'm pulling on that and keeping it taut, I know exactly where my cable's at. Have my hand on the stem of the vacuum cleaner. I believe if I put my hand on the upper part of the handle, it goes out of shot, so I'm going to just hold it right here. But basically, I've got my hand on the stem of the vacuum cleaner, the neck of the vacuum cleaner. I got the cable in my hand. I got the back feed going behind me. I'm technically standing on the cable, but I can kind of use my foot to push it behind me. And I know that the cable is behind me. It's not going to be a tripping hazard. And now I'm ready to vacuum. I'm not going to discuss actually how to vacuum. That's for somebody else to discuss. But this is just really how to plug things in and wind things up. So let's assume that I've done all my vacuuming for the day and I'm good to go. I'm ready to put my vacuum away. All right, let's go to the next step. For starters, I'm going to take this loop off of my neck and drop it back down to the ground. I'm going to come back down to the ground. I'm going to go ahead and find my wall receptacle. I got my outlet. I unplug it. Boom, done. Okay, now here comes the fun part. We're going to do the figure 8 in this section of the video, and then we'll do it again later on. I am just going to throw this cable away because I don't really need it right now. I'm going to throw it off to the side. Now I'm going to look at the side of my vacuum cleaner. I'm going to feel around, and I got my hand on the bottom tang. And the bottom tang faces downwards. And I got my hand on the upper tang, and the upper tang rotates. It rotates upwards or it unlocks downwards. I'm going to put it in the upward lock position, and now I'm going to find my cable. Okay, now I got the cable in my hand, and I'm holding the stem in my right hand. I got the cable in my left hand. Now here's what's going to happen. I'm going to bring this down underneath, and I'm going to bring it back upwards. Now I'm going to bring it down underneath the bottom tang, bring it upwards, and I'm going to cross them over the middle. It's going to go over the top tang, and it's going to come back down. And as I bring it down, it's going to cross over again. But as it crosses over, it's going to feed from the front to the back. Now if I make this face you, the camera, my left hand is on the left side, my right hand is on the right side. The cable is facing directly towards you, the viewer. I'm going to bring it upwards. I'm going to follow it upwards and across. There we go, across. So it's going from the lower left tang to the upper right tang, right side of the upper tang, and it goes back down. Lower right side wraps around, comes back up, goes from the lower left side to the upper right side, goes down the upper left side, and it's going to keep alternating. And what's going to happen is I'm going to feel a figure 8 pattern emerge. Now the value of this is it preserves the cable integrity. So you've got this thing called cable memory, and a cable will develop what's called memory, and that's going to shrink the length of the cable. It will also kink the cable, which will make it less safe because there's likely an increased likelihood of an internal break in your cable, which can actually start a short and possibly a fire. So these are all things to be mindful of. Okay, so now I've located the plug head. This is the end of the cable, and I've got this little clip right here. I'm going to wrap it around at the end. I'm going to feel for it to clip on to a piece of cable, a nice piece of cable, and I've got it securely anchored. And if I want to pop it off, I just grab this tang right here and I flip it down, and it's nice and loose, and it'll pop right off, but I don't want to do that. So I'm going to flip the tang back up and keep that cable on there. Okay, so in the next video, I'm going to talk about how to actually wrap an extension cord and do some other safety. We're also going to talk about receptacle safety because I'm going to show you the hammer trick and some other things. Be back in just a moment.